This is Ringler Radio, where you get all the latest news and information about structured settlements from Ringler Associates, the first name in structured settlements, helping injured people and their families since 1975. Ringler Radio is made possible in part by Allstate, American General, John Hancock, Liberty Mutual, MetLife, Mutual of Omaha, New York Life, Pacific Life, and Prudential. Now join Ringler Radio host Larry Cohen.
Well, hello and welcome to Ringler Radio, everyone. I'm Larry Cohen, the head of Ringler Associates Northeast Operations, and we're certainly glad you could join us again today. Well, a federal jury in Lafayette, Louisiana, recently ordered Takeda Pharmaceutical Company, based in Osaka, Japan, and its partner Eli Lilly, based in Indianapolis, to pay a combined $9 billion in punitive damages. The jury determined that the drug makers had hidden certain cancer risks associated with their Actos diabetes medicine and kept that from the public. Also recently, a Texas jury ordered Johnson & Johnson to pay $1.2 million to a woman injured by transvaginal mesh. Complications stemming from transvaginal mesh and subsequent lawsuits against the manufacturers is another instance of how defective products can impact so many of us. Well, today on Ringler Radio, we'll spotlight litigation surrounding Actos and transvaginal mesh and take a look at the controversial painkiller Zohydro, which is causing a stir across the nation. And to help us with all of that, we have two special guests, attorneys Andy Birchfield and Leigh O'Dell from the Beasley Allen law firm in Montgomery, Alabama. Andy manages the firm's mass tort section, which is recognized as a national leader in pharmaceutical litigation, and the section successfully resolved claims for thousands of clients in the Vioxx, Bextra, Celebrex, Baycol, Ephedra. Andy, you've done a lot of these cases. It's very impressive. And Leigh O'Dell practices in the mass tort section as well. Currently, her focus is on product liability actions involving transvaginal mesh and Gardasil. Well, both of you, welcome to Ringler Radio, and you both have pretty big jobs all along the way. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you, Larry. It's good to be with you this morning.
Andy, let's start with you and the Actos litigation. You were appointed to the Plaintiff Steering Committee by District Judge Rebecca Doherty, who's in charge of the Actos multi-district litigation. Tell us about your role in the consolidation of the lawsuits.
Larry, when there are multiple lawsuits filed across the country involving any one particular product, the courts will often consolidate those for efficiency purposes to one court. And that's what has taken place here. Judge Doherty is responsible for leading that litigation across the country, and there are literally thousands of lawsuits that are pending in her court. And she appoints a committee, a plaintiff steering committee, to be in charge of handling the discovery and prosecuting those cases, through trial. And I was fortunate to be appointed as a member of that committee. And so that's what we have been doing for the last couple of years, is leading the litigation, conducting the discovery, and moving forward with those cases.
Well, that's interesting. Give us an overview of Actos and the impact it's had on your clients. Give our audience a little bit of a flavor of what that's all about.
Actos is a prescription medication for type 2 diabetes, or adult-onset diabetes. It's one of literally dozens of prescription medicines that are used to treat diabetes. But Actos is one of three of a particular class called TZDs, and this is a troubled class of drugs used to treat diabetes. Resulin was the first, and it was pulled off the market after causing liver failure and deaths as a result of liver failure. Avandia is another member of the TZD class, and its use has been severely restricted once it was connected with problems with heart attacks and strokes. And then you have Actos, which is still on the market, but we see that there is a strong connection between the use of Actos and bladder cancer.
Well, in fact, the federal jury I mentioned earlier ordered Takeda and Eli Lilly to pay $9 billion for this Actos cancer risk. Tell us about that. Tell us about that $9 billion result there.
Well, the $9 billion number, that's a shocking number.
Yeah.
But it is a number that reflects the shocking conduct of Takeda and Eli Lilly in hiding the risk of bladder cancer. Bladder cancer is a very serious problem, and typically in this type of litigation, there's some key questions that you want to know. What did the company know about the problem, and when did they know it? And in this case, it was not a situation where the company just learned about this problem or safety problems with Actos once it was on the market. It certainly grew in its understanding of the problem, but it was aware of the safety problems with Actos long before the drug even went on the market. And so I think it was the conduct of these companies in hiding this serious risk, combined with the evidence about the amount of money that the companies made from these drugs by hiding the risk, that resulted in the $9 billion verdict.
Well, Andy, you as lawyers have seen this picture before. I mean, it seems that every time one of these drugs comes into question, there's this issue of knowledge earlier and somewhat of a hiding of the facts, and then you guys expose that, and big dollars get exchanged. You would think that those companies would have learned by now how to react and act in situations like that. But what do you think the impact is going to be of the degree of magnitude of that award? How's it going to impact future litigation in your view?
Well, I hope that it will send a message to drug companies to be very, very careful in how they respond to safety signals, and not to ignore those safety signals, but to act responsibly. The $9 billion verdict, that's the amount that the jury determined was appropriate, but there will be post-trial motions. The judge will consider additional evidence, decide whether or not that verdict should be reduced or not, and then it will proceed through the appellate process, most likely as well. But still, that's a strong message from a very conservative jury in Louisiana, that this conduct should not be tolerated.
Well, you're right. I mean, these cases do, even when the awards come out, take a natural course on appeal, et cetera, and there could be some changes in that. But that was a rather stunning amount, and I think it did send a message. How long typically does somebody have to be on that drug before they would potentially expect some of these effects? I know you mentioned it's somewhat variable, but give us some ballpark figures if you could.
Well, that's a question that's really undecided, unknown.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, the FDA has advised that there's an increased risk after taking Actos for 1 year. However, what the scientists, the experts that have looked at this drug, what they tell us is that Actos is not only an initiator of bladder cancer. That means that it actually can start the bladder cancer, but it's also what's called a promoter. And so that is if you have these cells that are problem cells to begin with, then Actos can act as it's like pouring fuel on the fire. Mm-hmm. The fire's already there, but Actos can actually fuel the development of bladder cancer. So someone who has been using Actos for even a very short period of time and has developed bladder cancer, that warrants a very close look, and it's certainly something that we would we would give careful consideration. We'd look at a number of factors, but I would not draw a bright line and say,
Gotcha.
You've only been taking it for 3 months. We would not pursue that case. Even the short-term users, because Actos is such a strong promoter of bladder cancer, I think that we can establish in many cases that even with short-term use that Actos played a substantial role in the development of bladder cancer.
Well, that's very helpful advice to the audience out there, and thank you very much for that, Andy. Now we're going to switch topics here and talk to your colleague, Leigh O'Dell. Leigh, back in 2012, we had you on Ringler Radio to discuss complications from transvaginal mesh. So give us an update on transvaginal mesh and the impact it's having on women across the country.
Thanks, Larry. It's good to be with you. And just bring an update for those that maybe don't think about transvaginal mesh very much, and I confess I do all the time, every day. But there are actually two types of products that are made of mesh and that are placed through an incision in the vaginal wall. And one is used to treat pelvic organ prolapse, when organs begin to move out of place in the female pelvis. And then the second type of product is used to treat stress urinary incontinence, and those are often called bladder slings. And right before we talked last time, Larry, that a lot of the pelvic organ prolapse products had been withdrawn from the market. And those products remain off the market for the most part at this time. The products used to treat stress urinary incontinence remain on the market in large measure, and they're still being implanted, unfortunately, in many women today. Millions of women have received transvaginal mesh for the treatment of these conditions, and many of them, even today, are experiencing erosion of the mesh through the vaginal mucosa. They're experiencing chronic pelvic pain, infection, pain with intercourse, a lot of challenging issues that are very intimate and very difficult to talk about for many women, and also very difficult to treat. And so it's a public health problem of really enormous proportions. And one of the things that we're finding is because it's difficult to treat, that a lot of women are suffering really without a lot of real hope of having change, of their condition.
Yeah, and I think you raise a good point. I think the personal nature of this is probably difficult for some women to get into and discuss, and maybe causes a little bit more of a problem in this area than would normally be the case. Right. So let's take a look at some of the litigation. Recently, Texas jury ordered Johnson & Johnson to pay $1.2 million to a woman involved and injured by transvaginal mesh. Talk to us about the case and what this verdict signifies. Well,
the plaintiff in that case, a woman by the name of Ms. Batiste, was implanted with a bladder sling that was manufactured by Johnson & Johnson, and it's a transobturator sling. And this was a very significant case because it was the first case in the country that's gone to trial and reached the jury that involved a bladder sling. There have been some other cases that tried previously that involved the pelvic organ prolapse products, but this is the first bladder sling case. And Ms. Batiste had chronic pain. She had pain with intercourse. She had erosion of the mesh through her vaginal wall, and had experienced some significant problems. And when the jury heard the evidence of, one, the fact that the product degrades in the body or it breaks down, and that Johnson & Johnson was aware of that but really did not warn about that condition. When they learned the information regarding the nerve injuries caused by the mesh, they found that the product was defective. And so we felt that was extremely significant that a jury, after hearing all the evidence that has been gathered very ably by many lawyers in the litigation, particularly on the plaintiff steering committee for the transvaginal mesh litigation. We felt like that was a tremendously positive sign because it shows that these cases can be tried effectively, that the evidence is very substantial. And I think for defendants, manufacturers like Johnson & Johnson, who had put these products on the market, they really felt that they may lose the pelvic organ prolapse cases, but may have more success with the bladder sling cases. But this is an indication that that's not the case.
Well, it's clear that cases of all the transvaginal mesh issues certainly resonate with juries. I mean, I think they can relate to some of the issues that are being spoken about, and so I believe that's also part of the mix. So here we had the bladder sling issue litigated. What about some of the other complications of transvaginal mesh and some of its long-term effects? Is there any real-life example you can tell us about that would let the audience here know about how that all comes down?
There's so many, but one of the cases that comes to mind is a woman that I represent. She was 42 when she had some slight problems with stress urinary incontinence. And, Larry, we have to remember that these problems are not they're not life-threatening. You're never, we don't want to deal with stress urinary incontinence, but it's a matter of quality of life. It's not a matter of something that will threaten your life, like bladder cancer, for example, that Andy was talking about. I mean, it's really a very different condition. So this young woman, beautiful, vibrant, healthy, exercising, just had finished her family, maybe a little, having a little difficulty with stress urinary incontinence, has a very brief conversation with her doctor, during which time he tells her that there's this very simple procedure that can be done, and it will, correct all of her problems. And what she didn't know is that there was the risk of erosion, there was a risk of chronic pain, and when I say chronic pain, chronic pelvic pain, meaning every time you move, you have pelvic pain. If you move certain ways, you have piercing pain. And for a vibrant woman with a healthy marriage, you have pain that impacts you during intercourse and making it almost impossible to experience that part of life. And so for this woman now, she's been through 2 surgeries. She still has nerve injury. Those nerves will probably never regenerate completely. And so, at best, you hope for some kind of equilibrium in the future. But what she's experienced is 6 years to date, 6 years of incredible just discomfort, pain, and just life-altering problems. And she's not alone, and she's just such a young woman. And so we see that in clients, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And for a client that's in their 70s, but is vibrant and healthy and think they're going to have what has been presented to them as a very minor procedure and then experience these conditions for clients that I represent and many other ladies I've talked to, they would say, had I known, I would never have said yes to that.
Well, the good news is they have, some lawyers like yourself that they're going to help pursue whatever, their rights are and hopefully get their lives back together in some fashion. You've mentioned, Lee, that these devices were never really studied or tested on women prior to being placed on the market. What needs to change in that arena? For all permanent implants like transvaginal mesh, I believe they should be required by the FDA to go through what's called the pre-market approval process, and they must be required to be tested in actual patients prior to being placed on the market. For these transvaginal mesh devices, they were never put in a woman prior to being marketed by these companies, and it's really a travesty, and it should never have happened. They should never have been allowed to be approved through the 510K process, and so I would advocate requiring clinical trials, requiring a showing in those clinical trials that there is benefit that outweighs the risk, and more than that the product that's being proposed is better
and safer than the alternatives that are already available to women. And for transvaginal mesh, the safer alternative was suture-based procedures that have been used for many years, and you don't see the complications that you're seeing in transvaginal mesh.
Well, if someone out there is suffering from the complications of transvaginal mesh, what would be their next steps? What would you advise?
If a woman is suffering, from chronic pain, erosion, chronic infection, I would say, number one, seek out a qualified urogynecologist to examine you. Many physicians are not really equipped to deal with some of these complications, but most urogynecologists are. And then the second thing is even if you've had your mesh implanted for a number of years, we've seen onset of symptoms as many as 5, 6, 7 years after implant. So I would encourage them to call a lawyer who's been very involved in the litigation, in the actual preparing of these cases, in order to explore their legal right.
Well, I think at the end of the show today, we'll give our folks a phone call for someone who might just do that. Well, let's take a quick break right now. And in a minute, we'll come right back here on Ringler Radio with attorneys Andy Birchfield and Leigh O'Dell and talk more about these fascinating topics. We'll be right back.
This is Ringler Radio from Ringler Associates, the leader in the structured settlements profession nationwide. Did you know that Ringler is involved in a third of all structured settlement cases in the country? Ringler Associates works with all the parties in a lawsuit settlement to find the best possible financial solution for the people involved. There's a Ringler Associate in all the major cities of the U.S. No one has more experience than a Ringler Associate. Check out our new website at www.ringlerassociates.com for the best information for claimants, legal professionals, and claims personnel, and to find the Ringler Associate nearest you. When it's your interest at stake in a lawsuit settlement, you want only the best financial plan. You can count on Ringler Associates to structure a customized plan that meets the needs of you and your family for the future. Visit ringlerassociates.com to learn more.
Well, welcome back to Ringler Radio. Glad you could join us. I'm your host, Larry Cohen, and I'm joined today by my special guests, attorneys Andy Birchfield and Leigh O'Dell from the Beasley Allen law firm down in Montgomery, Alabama. Well, Andy, let's switch topics again and take a look at the controversial painkiller Zohydro. Give us some background on this powerful painkiller and what are some of its effects? Give us a little bit of a roadmap there.
Yeah, this is a drug that causes great concern. It's pure hydrocodone, and in the past, I mean, we know of drugs like Vicodin and Lortab, powerful painkillers, but they have hydrocodone mixed with the ingredient of Tylenol, acetaminophen. So they're powerful, but their potency is limited in some way. This drug is pure hydrocodone. So it's not just like twice as powerful as Lortab or Vicodin. It's like 5 to 10 times more potent, and we have seen in recent times just an enormous spike in people becoming addicted and abusing prescription painkillers, and so the approval of this drug, the widespread use of this drug without any abuse deterrent feature factored in is very troubling.
Well, the interesting thing about this drug is that states are taking almost a state-by-state approach to really stand up to this issue. I know the Vermont's governor has established some emergency rules, but tell us about the procedural developments in Massachusetts regarding the attempted ban of Zohydro by the governor. And I understand there's some very recent developments in that case, but it's kind of unusual for a governor of a state, and I think we're seeing this in several states, to outright try to ban a drug from being marketed in the state. Tell us about that.
that's an extraordinary measure that Governor Patrick has taken there to ban the use of this drug in Massachusetts. I think that the extraordinary measure that he is taking just reflects the high level of concern that people in position to protect the health and the welfare of people within their states are seeing with the release of this drug. I mean, in the past we have seen drugs, painkillers like OxyContin that have been abused, and through that abuse and the addiction that ensues, we've seen lives devastated. And so there are extreme measures that are being taken to try to curtail the use of this drug.
Well, that whether or not they're successful immediately, I mean, that has to be a help to you in the area of the litigation that you're trying to pursue here, because there's nobody out there saying you're trying to stop something that's good for anybody. I mean, it looks like it's a real problem. And apropos of that, there's a serious prescription drug problem plaguing our states almost universally when it comes to this painkiller addiction. It seems to be the way a lot of, especially young people, are now seem to be getting their kicks, so to speak. With individuals taking it, I mean, this medication for recreational use, and some of them overdosing, I mean, where does the FDA stand in that arena in terms of working with the pharmaceutical companies to try to help stop that? I mean, I know it's an endemic problem around the country, but what's your view on that?
Well, the FDA has taken a controversial position in approving this drug. And the way the FDA works, when they are considering approving a drug that can be prescribed to Americans, they look at the safety and the efficacy of the drug, and oftentimes they involve what's called an advisory committee. They gather a group of experts from across the country with special expertise, in the arena of this particular drug, and they have those experts consider all the evidence and then take a vote on whether the drug should be approved or not. And in this case, the advisory committee overwhelmingly voted that it should not be approved. But it's an advisory committee. It doesn't hold any authority. And the FDA, they went against the advice of this committee, and they approved the drug nonetheless. And the FDA's position is acetaminophen, which is mixed with like Vicodin and Lortab, that can cause liver problems, and so people need an option that does not include acetaminophen, so you don't have the liver risk. I understand that, but when we've seen the epidemic of abuse and of painkillers, there needs to be some measures in place to prevent the widespread abuse and the lives that are devastated as a result.
Well, no question about that. It almost seems like in trying to affect some kind of a help to what's currently out there, they're approving something that adds to the issue and adds to the problem, and it's a tough position to be in. But I know that it's through the scrutiny by your firm and others like yours that tries to hold these folks' feet to the fire to make sure that the public out there is protected as best they can be. What do you see as changes in coming down the road when it comes to these controversial drugs? Any changes that you can see in the offing, either you, Lee, or Andy, about how some of these drugs can be regulated a little bit better?
Larry, I'm an eternal optimist, and I do think that there will be changes. But based on past experience, I have to say I'm fearful that those changes will not come until after we see the effects that it has on thousands, even tens of thousands of people. Several decades ago, the FDA was the gold standard in the regulatory bodies across the world. Mm-hmm. And the FDA was truly the watchdog But now we have seen since the early 90s and the change in the way that the FDA works with the drug companies, with the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, the drug companies now pay substantial fees to the FDA for an expedited review of their drugs, and so the FDA has become dependent in large measure on drug companies, and so instead of being a watchdog, they're more like a partner with the drug companies, and we need to change that. We need to go back to the way it was when the FDA, truly served as the watchdog. There are a lot of great scientists there at the FDA, and they do really good work, but their hands are tied in so many respects, and we need to address that.
Yeah. Leigh, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, just certainly would agree and echo Andy's comments. And the other thing that I would add is that we see in the early 90s, late 80s, when direct-to-consumer advertising started for pharmaceutical drugs. And if I would offer a comment, it would be that has not only driven sales, but driven a lot of consumers to ask for drugs, and I think their doctors, as a result of that request, have been prescribing them. So I would say that direct-to-consumer advertising, should be stopped, and of course it wasn't allowed for decades, and it rightly put the discussions about drugs more in the context of doctor-patient relationship, and basing those discussions on scientific data, as opposed to maybe some of the themes that they're hearing on direct-to-consumer advertisements.
I think the power of the advertising is clearly. I think you hit on something there too. I mean, despite all of the warnings that they babble on these ads, and the end result, it's the butterflies, it's those two bathtubs on the hill there with the. It's all of that helps drive these sales. But Andy, I think when you net it all out, when you talked about what's the problem out there today, I think it comes down like it does to many things. Follow the money. Where the money is, that tends to affect people's decisions in a way that may not be the most prudent. Well, this has been a great discussion with both of you. I think our audience has learned a lot about all of these drugs you've mentioned. Andy, if someone wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Well, they can call our toll-free number, 1-800-898-2034, or they can go to the Beasley Allen website, and it's just BeasleyAllen.com, and there you can get my contact information or Leigh's contact information, as well as see other areas in which our firm is actively involved in litigation.
Terrific. Any special way to get a hold of you, Leigh?
No, the same.
The same.
I would just, yes.
Okay, and let me just, for the audience, BeasleyAllen.com is BeasleyAllen.com. And as you can see with both Andy and Leigh, you'll be well served if you have any issues around these drugs and you want to learn more about them. So with that, I want to thank you. And if any of our listeners out there want to find any Ringler Associate, they can do that on RinglerAssociates.com. We're all listed there. And if you're a first-time listener and you want to listen to more Ringler Radio shows, you can find all of the Ringler Radio shows. They're all archived on RinglerAssociates.com, RinglerRadio.com, or LegalTalkNetwork.com, or you can even go to iTunes, where they're all there for your taking, and you can download them to your iPod or your iPad and walk around the park and listen to Andy and Leigh talk about these drug issues. So with that, I'd say, again, thank you, Andy and Leigh, for joining me.
Thank you, Larry. It's been great talking with you this morning.
Terrific.
Yes.
Thank both of you. And to the rest of you out there, go have a great, great day. Bye-bye.
The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer. Thanks for listening to Ringler Radio. With over 1 million listeners, Ringler Associates, the first name in structured settlements. Visit RinglerAssociates.com today.